Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Oakley here. I'm coming to you from Alaska. I'm about to get on a plane to China. So typical lifestyle when you're doing a lot of international work. So I'm sending you a recorded conversation because it was going to be kind of difficult to make this all work. But I'm really excited for being a small part of this awesome conference and help kick it off. Especially happy that I'm starting off the first theme of the weekend, and that's innovations in wildlife medicine, rescue and rehabilitation, a really cool topic that I've kind of been chasing my whole career. So I'll just get started and happy to share things with everyone, and thank you for inviting me. So I thought I'd start out with where I am now and where it all started for me. This is a nice map of North America. And if you look up in the left corner, you'll see just a little bit of Alaska, and I'm kind of down in the lower right corner. If you see that triangle, that's where it's all started for me. That triangle covers the Yukon Territory, which is a state within Canada, sort of similar to a state. It's a pretty big chunk of real estate, not as big as Western Australia, about half the size, but way less people, only about 35,000 people in that huge area, tons of wildlife and tons of, government control and management of that wildlife. The Yukon borders Alaska to its west, as you can see, and also, lies within some Arctic and subarctic areas. The Yukon, being a territory, has its own government, but it also lies within Canada, which is the federal government, and then it also has within the Yukon 14 independent Aboriginal groups that have their own self-governments. So that's a lot of government management and interest in wildlife, and it was actually challenging at first, but an awesome way for me to start my career in wildlife medicine and rehabilitation. And that's because you have to work within a lot of different governments. You have to learn and work with local communities and local governments, local people, Aboriginal folks. It was just a great way for me to really learn some of the important lessons that I've learned throughout my career. When I first started, to be honest, I was just more excited about jumping in a helicopter and learning how to dart animals. That was like, wow, exciting. I was excited about some of the conservation projects that we were working on. Wood bison was one of them. We worked with wolves and bears. And, I had never worked for a government before. So, I had a lot to learn in that area, but also a lot to learn just in working with wildlife. What's the difference between wildlife health and wildlife rehabilitation? What's the importance of treating the individual versus looking at a population level? As I worked more with the local people and local governments, I became really more excited about that than I was about jumping in a helicopter. I mean, I still do that. That's still fun and exciting. But I feel like you can have a much better lasting and bigger influence when you're working at kind of this bigger level, more sustainable. You can, work with people on education programs. You can get at the source of what are all the big issues affecting wildlife. Sorry. Let's see. Of course, some of the big issues that I was learning from people who'd spent their whole lives in the Yukon were that climate change was a factor, that temperature swings were having huge impacts on the wildlife and the survival of wildlife that they were seeing in this area. So, when we were having huge warm-ups in the winter, when it should be 40 below, that was causing crust to form on the snow, melting, and that was killing a lot of the bears and a lot of marmots and other, ground squirrels and creatures that need that layer of snow over top of their dens to survive during hibernation. Warming climate also was leading to survival of parasites and things that wouldn't normally survive. So a big one was winter tick, Dermacentor albopictus. That's a normal parasite in southern Canada and throughout some of the northern US ranges of elk and moose and deer. But we hadn't yet seen it as far north as we were in the Yukon, Alaska. It still hasn't made it to Alaska, hopefully. And the problem is that, you know, when you have a naive species, sometimes they can overreact to it. So, you know, again, it was local people that were pointing out that, man, those elk are itchy. You know, man, those elk, they're bald. What's with them? And then we started taking a closer look and, you know, got our hands on some, had some that were hit by car, and we went out to check on them and actually found ticks on them. So just another really interesting way, how working on the individual, how wildlife rehabilitation can lead to, you know, discovery and understanding about what wildlife health issues are coming down the pipe. You know, other issues that we had in the Yukon was kind of the basics of problem animals. I mean, garbage that doesn't get put away, you get problem bears, you know, then you have bears that will attack dogs and even people. Then you have people that have to shoot bears because of that. Then you have orphan bear cubs, and there you are right back at wildlife rehabilitation. What do you do with those bear cubs? Can you rehabilitate them or not? Can you release them back to the wild or not? So, you know, all of these different cycles I was getting to learn as I worked as a wildlife veterinarian for the Yukon government. Roadkill issues were a big problem, or just animals that were injured on the road, and still a big issue across the north and in a lot of places. I know in Australia, you guys have huge issues with roadkill with your macropods and other animals. A not so fun fact that isn't a lot, this sign comes from an area in Alaska called the Mat-Su Valley. This is early in June when we took this picture, so there was still a few weeks left to go. And on average, one moose is killed a day on just this stretch of road. So of course, that's a lot of loss of moose. Some don't die, some are injured. We don't usually hear about those injured moose. We do hear about moose calves. So moose calf rehabilitation in Alaska is a big political debate. A lot of people want to do things like right the wrongs. They want to help these moose calves get back to the wild where they belong to live their lives. But then there's concern about diseases. There's concern about the behavior of the animals. Are they raised properly? Where can they be put back? And are you just kind of regenerating the system, putting more moose back where there's maybe an overabundance, and or where people haven't learned yet to slow down? So again, this role of wildlife rehabilitators has been so important in this area. If Fish and Game is all over it, having to deal with carcasses and then pick up moose calves, and then the rehabilitators are taking in the calves and raising them up. And it becomes a really big role for the wildlife rehabilitators to, you know, show these calves, show how difficult it is to raise them in captivity, how difficult it is to get them back out to the wild, how for some of them this means a life of captivity, if you can find a center to take them. And so it's such an important role for wildlife rehabilitators to, you know, work with the public to get these education campaigns going. Throughout today, the theme today is going to be innovation in wildlife medicine, and it's a really interesting one. Innovation is something that I've kind of redefined personally and chased my whole career. My original interest in wildlife vet med was in ways that we could adapt some of the traditional tools that we have in the clinic, some of the techniques, and make them work in the field. And I had to spend a lot of time, you know, making that happen. I had to go out in the field and do field surgeries. Vasectomies of wolves was actually a project that was around an area where there was an endangered caribou herd. So we were trying to slow down, you know, allow the wolves to pair, to dig their dens, to live a fairly normal life, but have no kids. So that was one project that I worked on. And how do you do surgeries in the field? You know, like, I mean, remote field, we're flying in. So the first time I showed up to the helicopter, I had, you know, like 15 bags and all this stuff. And they're like, okay, repack that into 2 bags and we'll take you. So, you know, it was a lot of adapting things. Also trying to make things more portable. And so, you know, I got really excited about that. And it's been something I've followed. And, you know, I think for a lot of us, having, you know, some of this cutting edge technology that we can take in the field is just awesome. So as things are getting more portable, we can do better medicine. So we can have portable ultrasound to do, to look for, you know, blood in the abdomen, to look to see if an animal's pregnant quite quickly, to check for fluids, or for body condition, you can measure fat. So there's, you can look for damage to the bladder, if there even is a bladder, check out all the main organs in sort of a ER approach with a fast ultrasound exam. So, there's ultrasound has been a great tool that just keeps getting smaller and smaller. And if you look at, this picture, you can see that picture there is called I think it's called the eye butterfly. It's a great little portable one now that's fairly affordable. You're really just buying the probe, and then it attaches to your phone or sends it through a Wi-Fi signal. And it's a pretty darn good picture, which is nice. The other picture over on the other side of the screen with me with these goggles is a more traditional one that you can, a lot of large animals vets have. You kind of carry it, it's waterproof, you can flip it open, or you can wear these little goggles in the sun so you can just boom, boom, do a lot of preg checking. But it's also really nice in the field because you often have a lot of glaring sunny days, and you can use these eyepieces that help you just see the screen basically in your goggles. Besides ultrasound, of course, there's endoscopy, where you can look inside the animal, do some, sex determination. You can use it for treating or, checking out air sacs and issues in injured ducts. Of course, there's iStat, which is becoming more affordable and more portable. I mean, it already is really portable. It's just this little device where you can take in the field. Used to be super expensive, but those prices are coming down, where you can do some chemistry, right there at the animal, get some blood, get some information on some of the basic chemistries. And of course, X-ray has become more and more portable. I have one from Sound that's just takes phenomenal pictures, is really easy to pack around. We take it out in the field and X-ray bison and reindeer and moose and muskox, kind of anything that we can, we drag it out there, and we use it, in remote communities when we're traveling, even internationally. We've taken to Costa Rica and worked with sloths, and it's just so nice to have that really portable X-ray with you. The monitors are great now. We have an iPet map, which is fantastic. If you guys haven't checked that one out, I highly recommend it. It's got blood pressure, capnograph functions, great ECG, great little pulse oximeter, super portable, just sits in your hand for all of that. You don't need the big monitors anymore. And this one's great, and you can take it everywhere with you. In addition to all of these gadgets, I think telemedicine is a really good cutting edge kind of technology that we've got, because for me, I don't remember how to read some of these X-rays. I don't remember how to, even with the ultrasound, I struggle, and I'm still learning ultrasound. So it really helps to have the telemedicine options. I mean, the little butterfly IQ one there in the picture has where you can record the screen and share it and get interpretation. I mean, that all costs money, but you can, as a wildlife center, sometimes work out deals where you can get things more cheaply, or it might be worth, paying for it to get that information. Oxygen concentrators are something that have been really important for our work. Whenever you're immobilizing an animal, I would assume, especially if you're not using an inhaled anesthetic, but using injectable anesthetics. So many studies have shown that intranasal oxygen really supports them. A lot of them have blood gas values in oxygen that are way below hypoxic. So if they weren't anesthetized, they wouldn't be awake because their brain is so hypoxic. So really important, just because they look like they're okay doesn't mean that there's not brain damage happening. So, when you anesthetize animal for a procedure, you really should have portable oxygen with you, which can be as simple as an oxygen tank with a little tube to run the oxygen up the nose, or these oxygen concentrators that kind of grab oxygen from the air. And you can take those anywhere. You don't need tanks. They're not as dangerous as transporting tanks. You don't have to worry about getting tanks when you're remote villages and that kind of thing. This is, more the cutting edge side of things. So this is an X-ray, this is an ultrasound of a heart of a deer, and it was struggling losing weight, and, not sure actually the significance of the findings, but you can clearly see regurgitation. And I mean, this is just a standard ultrasound. So that kind of red, if you look over here and you see that red area that's squirting back into that's a side view of the ventricle of the heart, that red line that's squirting backwards instead of forwards, that's a regurgitation or damage to the valves. So, the diagnostics are really, really good now. They're not as expensive as they used to be. And of course, they're super portable. This is a picture from the early days when I was first doing wildlife rehab work and traveling around doing some research projects. This one started out because, as I mentioned earlier, local people were concerned about marmots that were dying during hibernation because of warming climate and these kind of crazy warming days in the middle of winter. And I just look at this and laugh because this is, this was our portable ISO machine. It's like the worst setup. I mean, the tent was great because I was going to be putting in little transmitters, little temperature loggers into the abdomen of the animal. So the tent is a great way to protect the animal, from hypothermia or from dust blowing around. You have a clean space to work. But like that ISO machine on a rolly thing that I had to pack up the mountain, that didn't work well. And, as soon as I got to Australia, when I came to help on the bushfires, it was really cool to see how people had it just so dialed in. I think it was some New Zealanders we work with had like the ISO machines on backpacks, it's a ISO machine that's in a Pelican case. Open it up, there's your machine. Attach some oxygen and you got it going. That may not be legal in all parts of Australia, we came to find out, but it is certainly used pretty much in every country that I've been to now. I mean, I use it for sea lion work in Alaska when we go out and work on stellar sea lions to do, to put some satellite tags on them, or even for disentanglements, we take that portable ISO machine with us. And, so many countries, Costa Rica, even in some really remote spots, Uganda, everyone has like this ISO machine that you can adapt. And I think it's pretty common in human medicine too, like these field kits where they have these Pelican cases where you just basically have the machine kind of set in there. It's a great way to transport it. So I talked about one aspect of anesthesia, the portable backpacks, but there's also dart guns, blowpipes, stick poles. All of these can be high tech and they can also be homemade. I mean, when we were in Sri Lanka, we were, just basically sawing off little broomstick pipes, like the hollow broomsticks. We were, making our own darts to make blow darts. Or you can, buy the blow dart package from MaxiJect, which is a great, really nice portable little system, and so that's a great way to be able to both anesthetize an animal, but also not get hurt. This is a really bad example of not getting hurt because I'm blow darting a bear at close up. But if you're trying to work with an animal that's fractious, that's in a cage or in an enclosure or in a space where you can't get at them, a blow dart is a really low impact. It's not as likely to hurt them compared to a dart, even if you're using, like CO2 fire darts. So, just using your breath, that's a great way. You can also vaccinate animals that way. You can deliver treatment. So if you have a kangaroo or something that you've got in treatment for a while, I mean, you can find a little spot and, get a dart in them to do a treatment without too much stress of actually getting there with a dart gun, and just way less impact and muscle damage for them. There's a picture of the sea lion. You could kind of see the little Pelican case backpack that I had. Got an esophageal thermometer. Those are not very expensive and a great way to monitor on animals that are where it's hard to hear their heart. You just slide that sucker down into their esophagus and you can hear the heart, on a lot of these bigger species. There's the backpack with ISO machine in it. Monitoring is so important. It's, I talked about gadgets and, cutting edge technology, but I don't want to overlook how in so many of these countries, no one has that, when I was in Uganda, when I was in Sri Lanka, sometimes they didn't have a pulse ox, and, we can donate and help to get them. But there are really basic things you can do during, for example, field anesthesia or just examining an animal that don't require a lot, just your stethoscope, your thermometer, and, maybe a pulse oximeter if you have it. So you can check reflexes, you can, be doing that really thorough nose to tail physical exam, get in touch with their respiration, the color of their tongue, what's their heart rate, what's the mucous membrane color, what's their cap refill time. All those things are, we don't want to overlook them. These gadgets are great because they help give us, more information, better information, but don't overlook your basics. That's just, I feel like when I went to countries that didn't have a lot, they were still doing great medicine, like really good medicine. They were so good at their physical exams. They were so good at, checking the animal nose to tail and picking up changes in respiration because they were always in tune with it. Some of the drugs that have changed and improved over time, in my opinion, are a lot of the anesthetics. Now we use BAM on kind of everything. I don't know if you guys are familiar with BAM. That's butorphanol, azaparone, and medetomidine. That combination is available commercially, at least in the United States. I'm not sure about Australia and a few other countries in Scandinavia, I believe. BAM works fantastic on ungulates. I use it on moose, mountain goats, muskox, caribou, reindeer, lots of deer species, Sitka deer. Bison, it works great on bison. It's a good alternative that gets you away from some of the bigger narcotics that you have to use. So, the carfentanyls and the thiofentanyls, which are so deadly, so expensive, so hard to get, often not available internationally in some of these countries. So BAM is a good one. You can make it yourself if you can get a hold of butorphanol, azaparone, and medetomidine, and you can use xylazine too. You can figure it out and make that combination. So that's a good option. Most of the countries I've worked in didn't have a lot of choice for drugs for anesthesia, but luckily they had a couple things. They had ketamine and they had xylazine. And at first, for example, when working in Sri Lanka, and I was kind of like, oh, ketamine and xylazine, it's such a messy drug. It's not as specific as medetomidine, it hits all these other alpha-2 receptors. But man, in the hands of people who are experienced with it, it works really well. And, same with, and adding Zolotil, if you can get it, Zolotil or Tilazol as it's called in some countries, that's a great option as well. And you don't need to just use Tilazol or Zolotil. In fact, don't just use Zolotil. If you have xylazine or medetomidine that you can add, you can cut your Zolotil doses in half or even less if you just add an alpha-2. So that's probably not new science, but it's something we should always keep in mind. And working internationally, you will always bump into issues with drugs. You will always be like, well, what do we got? What's in the toolbox for this country? Because it changes everywhere I've gone. It changes even within the, my own country, within the US. We can barely get diazepam anymore, Valium. Like, it's just so hard to get since COVID. Now we can finally get it, but a small vial is probably about $400. So it's really expensive. Where I remember working in the bushfires with everybody there, the diazepam was a great way to sedate the macropods. It doesn't have a lot of pain control, but it really seems to work well for them in terms of immobilizing them. Some other cool treatments that have come along are gut health. A lot of information about gut health. I think you folks in Australia know all about it. I think working with animals like koalas, a lot of the macropods and things that have these, really complicated gut floras, about doing fecal transformations, about doing rumen transformations, it's not a rumen, but doing the GI transformation, poothies, taking some healthy poop and making it into a smoothie and giving it to the animal to try to reseed the microfauna. And that's just so, I think we're learning more and more how important that really is in a sick animal, is to get there when they're going, starting to have diarrhea and it's just chronic and going on, is you got to get their gut flora back, kind of reseeded and reestablished. Plasma transfers are not super new, but also they are really important. And I've been seeing them in a lot of different countries now, which is great. Taking the blood from an adult, of a healthy adult, separating out that plasma and then giving the plasma IV to a neonate. And it doesn't have to be within the first couple of days. If you come across an animal that's 4 or 5 days old and it's too late to give it colostrum, plasma transfer is a great way. And it can be given IP, like into the peritoneum, or it can be given IV. Some people were talking about giving an IM and sub-Q. I don't know if that works. I kind of doubt it, but definitely IV or IP. Fish skin, one of my favorite topics. Fish skin is something I learned about way back when from an expert at UC Davis, Dr. Jamie Payton. It was a really interesting case with a dog named Archer who was burned on 40% of his body. He had been tied to a house that burned down. So Archer's owners didn't want to give up on him. we reached out to Dr. Payton, and she was looking for more animals to include in some work studies she was doing. So Archer got lucky. We were able to treat his wounds with fish skin, and it was such a turning point for me to see how these new treatments can improve the health of an animal that's so injured. I mean, fish skin decreased the pain meds that we had to give him by more than half. It decreased the healing time. Like I've seen burns, this was quite extensive, but I mean, it was like a scaffold for like these cells to just travel across. A lot less scarring, a lot less like kind of tight tissue, and you just get these islands of cells just taking off, where in a lot of burns it starts kind of shrinking down and becoming this really tight band of scar tissue. And you still will get some scar tissue, but with the fish skin you significantly reduce that. The really cool work that Dr. Payton had been doing was on animals in the California wildfires, where bears came in with totally burned off pads, and she was able to put the fish skin on like slippers, suture it on with absorbable suture, and these animals were let loose into enclosures to be watched, and they didn't seem to need as much pain meds. They were actually moving instead of just lying there. They could put weight. So in addition to fighting off infection and protecting that new growing skin, there was definite pain control. When the Australian wildfires happened, we were excited well, here's an opportunity, something I learned. And being with a TV show, I'm like, oh, maybe we can raise money and come over. And so that's what we did. And it was an experience. It was a lot of there were a lot of learning experiences for me there. When you want to come in and help, and you're coming into a place that you don't know the system, there's a lot to learn, and that was a really good lesson for me. Wanting to do more work internationally is learning from the local vets, following the local rules and trying to understand why they're there. There were things about like, if a kangaroo has a couple toes, they only have one or two toes, or three toes, I guess. If you have to amputate a toe, then that's it. They have to be euthanized. And it was like, wait, what? So things like that were challenging. There was a lot of resistance, I think, to fish skin initially, but I think it's come around so much. I mean, I see it all over in Costa Rica and a lot of other countries. We use it for not just burns, but for chronic wounds as well. It's very good for chronic infected skin wounds or really big defects to just improve the healing. But yeah, that was a cool thing to be able to raise money, bring it, be able to pay for Dr. Payton to come over, be able to share some of the technology that she was developing. And now, at the time it was like, well, here's a couple little pieces of fish skin, and it was sort of hard to, make much of a difference or feel like you were, except to educate other vets or to share this technology and see if it would help other vets in the work they're doing with wildlife or otherwise. But since then, there's a lot of other companies are making it. The big one is Coresis out of Iceland. I think they're actually changing their name to something, or they're joining with another company, but Coresis in Iceland has a cod skin that's freeze dried. So very easy to transport, still pretty expensive, but not as expensive as some of the earlier human products. And there's recipes on how to make your own tilapia fish skin and use it. And I know several vets who've done it. And I have a recipe, so you could always reach out to me. It's not complicated. You have to take tilapia skin. You have to, take away the subcu tissues. You soak it in some chlorhexidine and I think glycerol. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward recipe. And then you rinse it and put it on. And we've used it in rabbits. We've used it in so many different species, and it really is a great biobandage. Implants. So implants are another really cool new treatment that is taking off. And prosthetics, I guess, is what I'm talking about. Of course, we know we can fix beaks and shells and do a lot with different types of plastics or these rubberized plastics. But there's also 3D printing now. There's a lot of specialists, human specialists and otherwise, that want to get out and help wildlife. So partnering with these folks is really cool. This is Namal, who's a couple-year-old elephant, 3-year-old Asian elephant in Sri Lanka. She had her leg blown off in a mine. And this was just like a homemade prosthetic that someone did out of plastic. And, it was breaking, and they were having to constantly work on it. but it's worth a try. And I think the point here is that, you know, all over the place, sometimes you can get these kind of more professional looking prosthetics like this one. This is also an Asian elephant named Motala from Thailand, was a pretty well-covered case. And Motala was 50 years old when she lost her limb, and they were able to get a prosthetic, and a pretty darn nice one that they had to adapt several times. So, you know, you can go right from really low tech to really high tech now in prosthetics. And I guess some of the points of these things, of these kind of maybe crazy or different treatments, is to think outside the box for your patients, is to, you know, if you don't know, reach out to others, and there's probably someone out there who's done it or done something similar who's willing to share. It's really important as wildlife rehabilitators that when we release our animals out there, that we monitor and can prove success. Otherwise, that's a strong argument, and maybe a good one for, you know, why bother? Why put all these resources and efforts into helping this animal? It's not going to survive anyway, or that can be the argument. So making sure that they do well once released is important. So, you know, you have radio collars and data loggers are kind of the older ways, and it's still very common. The collars now do GPS locations. They even send them, some of them send SMS texts so that you know where the animal is. Of course, there's camera traps that you can set up in an area where an animal's released if they're loyal to that area. There's DNA hair traps. I mean, those are all kind of costly. New information, like kind of some of the new techniques. And I think there's still a few years off, but really cool with the artificial intelligence and crowdsourcing pictures. I encourage you to check out a website called wildlabs.net. Wildlabs is really doing a lot of these like photo surveys. So you put all this information in, some of it's satellite data, some of it's drone data. They're even getting people from all over the world to share their pictures in a certain national park or in a certain region, and those pictures can be sorted through artificial intelligence and get to know certain individuals of endangered species, or even just abundance of that species. That's kind of cool. Here's some more of this upper picture is identifying individuals because of reticulated patterns. So that's something that can be done. The one on the bottom is a cool project called Bear ID, which is going on in Alaska and British Columbia. And that project is looking at kind of facial recognition software and using that. And they've identified, I think, like 140 bears, between like British brown bears, coastal brown bears along the coast of British Columbia up into Alaska, Katmai. And they identify those individuals when tourists submit pictures correctly about 84% of the time. So still work to be done, but really cool technology that will help us monitor success in the future. I think my favorite innovation, I think it's kind of telling in how I've changed in my career, and, you know, yeah, sure. The helicopter darting, exciting. That's innovative. You can have all kinds of cool ways you dart an animal and put a radio collar, et cetera. But what I find most innovative these days are concepts. And that, you know, that's something, some of the concepts are so important in how we help wildlife. And as a rehabilitation center, that's really, I mean, you're helping the individual, no doubt, but you are also so perfectly poised to help wildlife on a bigger scale, in, you know, as more of an education, as an arm of education, to let people know why the animals are coming into rehabilitation centers in the first place. You're also the first one to see increasing or emerging diseases. You know, you're sort of like the sentinel one. You're going to see if there's suddenly a whole bunch of wombats that are showing up in rehabilitation centers, you're going to sound the alarm. And I mean, that's a huge value for wildlife conservation, and for, you know, picking up on these wildlife diseases early. And it's just so important that we, as wildlife rehabilitators, advertise that and share that this is a really important part of what we do, and just keep pointing out to people, you know, when you have these big die-offs, or even if they start slow, wildlife centers is where you often pick it up first, you know, and you can share information about these injured individuals with biologists. It's a way that biologists can find out about new ticks, new parasites, new diseases, because they can get their hands on individuals when they may not have like a whole big study going where they would otherwise be able to contact or get samples from these important species. a really cool concept that is not really new as well, but it is innovative. It continues to be to grow, I think, and it's important within wildlife rehabilitation. That's the One Health concept, and that's where rehabilitation centers. It's where many disciplines work together. So, it's veterinarians, it's public health officials, it's human physicians, and it's for a common goal, not just to help wildlife, but to help people's health and to help the environment and all of those, and knowing those things are related. And as wildlife rehabilitators, we're, again, perfectly poised to educate the public about what these wildlife health diseases can mean, how improving the health of individual animals also will help, with their abundance and their place within the ecosystem, and why they're threatened in the first place. Zoonotic diseases, of course, are a perfect example of this. And, I went to Uganda recently, and I've never seen such a more more beautiful example of One Health as when I went to what's called I'm going to mess it up now, the ctph.org. It's the, oh, darn it. It's the community. It's community with public health, but darn, I'm sorry, I forgot the whole thing, but the community public health center there was actually started by a veterinarian named Dr. Gladys Kalima-Zukowska. And if you have not read her book, highly recommend it. It's on Audible, Walking with Gorillas. It kind of gives an example. She's the first wildlife vet in Uganda, and she talks about, how she came around to this One Health concept and how important it still is in so many wildlife projects. And kind of her kind of aha moment was, wanting to work with gorillas, really cool to work with gorillas. Then all of a sudden, when she first got her job to work with gorillas, gorilla babies were losing all their hair and dying, and why were they dying? They were getting a handle on poaching and trying to get people to stop poaching, but why were baby gorillas suddenly getting bald and dying? And so, it turned out that, with the studies that these gorillas were getting scabies. So there was, a lot of deforestation. The gorillas were needing to eat. They were coming into communities. They're having this really close interface and contact with people, maybe not directly, but, on their clothing, in their, making beds, like near where people were. And somehow scabies was getting transmitted from people to gorillas. And, it became an initiative to not only treat gorillas for scabies, but what about the people who live there? What about, the different health issues they have? Any health issues that these people have in these kind of bordering communities are going to affect gorillas, whether it's COVID, other respiratory infections, certain parasites will be shared between people and gorillas. And of course, scabies is an example where, yeah, it was definitely causing some issues with people, but it was killing gorillas. So, that really pushed an initiative to get the government and people to work together, the community work together to improve the health of the local people. And when they improved the health of the local people, they were actually they were doing wildlife conservation. And so that's the One Health concept is, everybody's health matters, especially when you have these really tight overlaps. And you do have these overlaps between endangered species and people and livestock everywhere now in all the biodiversity hotspots. So you just can't ignore it. You have to address it and try to find ways to keep the people and the livestock healthy. That's just as important as doing a wildlife conservation project, because it will affect the health of the animals in the wild. Another cool thing that was done in Uganda, which I just loved, was how they were empowering local communities and involving them in everything. And again, that kind of went back to my roots, like where, all the issues, all the wildlife management issues that I got to work on as a wildlife veterinarian for Yukon government came from the ground up. And that was really important. It came from the First Nation government, from the First Nation people that said, hey, this is an issue, or this is an important problem. Let's work on it together. And that's that local knowledge and that buy-in from the beginning is so important. And if you don't have that already in your programs, I strongly urge you to get it, to work with local people, to try to involve the community in your releases, in any type of education programs for kids, because that's how you get buy-in. And that's also how you get more information on how populations are changing, or how, what you can do to help wildlife. Another thing is that I would encourage everyone to do is think outside the box around wildlife releases. That's just a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. It's maybe not a concept yet, but I really feel like we need to address some of our questions. I've been to so many places, so many different wildlife centers around the world, and wildlife rehab centers, and everyone has a different opinion on if you can release some similar birds that have been imprinted in captivity, or can you release some of these wildcats that come in? I mean, wildcats are a really good example because your own cat can go feral and live perfectly happy life without you. So when we get wildcats into captivity, is there a way to make them less dangerous to people, you know, especially if they're orphaned, and can they be released back to the wild? Another case we had was with Elsa, who was a sloth who's smiling down at us at the end in the picture there. And Elsa didn't have the best use of her hind legs, but sloths are pretty good, like with even just missing like one or two legs, they can actually still raise a baby and get around. We have a lot of amputated sloths because they get electrocuted on power lines, and that causes amputations, or the arm rots off because of the shock and the fracture and the burn. And those animals still survive, especially if given treatment. They still will breed and raise a family with you know, raise babies with 3 legs, and sometimes even 2. So Elsa, we talked about, she'd been in captivity for a while. She was in heat, so she was screaming constantly. And it was like, she was like, let me go, let me go, let me go. And we just, you know, you don't want to set an animal up for failure, but the situation she was in captivity was not the best either. And there aren't a lot of options. And so we made the decision to do a soft release, and months later, she's doing awesome. She was seen breeding. She's out there going around, you know, doing her sloth thing. So, you know, it doesn't apply to every species. It's not something that can be said across the board. It's just something that, you know, I want to do myself. I just feel like there are so many like urban myths or, you know, local, you know, sort of local mantras of, oh, that species can't be released. Oh, when this happens, when it has one toe, it can't survive anymore. Another example is 3-legged deer. You know, we got a 3-legged deer, oh no, it had to be put down. I mean, a 3-legged deer? And then we start getting in all these pictures of big buck 3-legged bulls that were, you know, elk bulls that were doing just fine and breeding and running around. You know, we've seen a lot of 3-legged bears that are, you know, digging a den every year, and they're missing one front leg, and they're raising cubs, sows raising cubs. So, you know, I think wildlife are tougher than we think. And of course, we don't want to set them up for failure, but we don't want to hold them away from their life and their ability to contribute to the biodiversity of their population without giving them a shot. So yeah, I'm all about helping them out. I'm all about treating, all about supporting them. We don't want them to suffer. But in the end, our ultimate goal, I think for all of us, is to get them back to the wild. A really important concept, and something I hadn't thought about, but I needed to, was parachute science. And that's where, you know, scientists and conservationists and veterinarians from high income countries kind of parachute in, provide temporary support to a developing area, developing nation, and then leave after the project is finished with no investment in local capacity building. I think most funding agencies and most big projects don't, you know, always allow for capacity building and sharing of knowledge. But that's something that I think is really important for us to think about as well, as, you know, we're working with local communities, even on more of a regional level, is that we empower people within the community, that we work with them to be the person to let us know, or, you know, how can we help animals and work together. And also capacity building between our centers, you know, helping each other out. If you go on international projects, you know, making sure that, yeah, you know, I'm coming to help, but this is more about training and education, and the local people being the ones leading the show. And I'm so happy to do that now. And really the cool thing is, I find when I go to these other, you know, developing countries, I feel like I learn so much more. And it's always humbling. I feel like I go there like, oh, I got some cool gadget to show them. I got this, you know, we're going to bring this, you know, it's not really maybe practical for them to be using that on one hand, but it's also what I come away with is they didn't need that gadget. And I learned more than I taught. So it's just cool to keep your mind open, and to travel to these places, and to think about long-term sustainability, and for long-term sustainable solutions when you go internationally to work. This is an example of Toucan Rescue Ranch in Costa Rica. That kind of fuzzy looking thing is a trial where they're trying to keep sloths off power lines. So it's an example of how wildlife rehab centers can work with the government, work with companies to try to develop solutions when something the company is doing is causing the animals to end up in rehabilitation or treatment. And so, you know, this is a great project, and it's the number 1 cause for sloth injuries, is that they climb up power lines, they grab onto the lines, and then they get zapped. And so the little sloth there, her name is Oatmeal, severely burned, fractured arm, and then, you know, a lot of the sloths, as they're rehabilitating in this area, they're learning, we're using them as kind of like the crash testers to make sure that they can't climb up these different power poles. That one they climb up easily, by the way, but you know, it's prototype 1, so we're working on others. A cool concept is, how does empowering women help wildlife? And I think that I keep bumping into in a lot of countries, and it really came out when I was in Uganda recently, that empowering women is a great way to help wildlife. It doesn't really seem like it's super, you know, direct, but there's a lot of reasons for that. Of course, I think one of the more obvious ones is overpopulation. When you have empowered women and they have access to contraception and family planning, they often will choose to have, you know, they control their bodies. They choose to have less children. The children they have are healthier. They're often way better educated. And then there's less pressure on the resources. There's less, you know, need to cut down trees to get wood to feed the family. There's less sick kids. There's less wives actually really encouraging their husbands to go out there and get them some bushmeat, even though they're trying not to do that, you know. So it's a really interesting way that these communities that surround the national parks, where they're trying to work to empower the women, and finding that really helps wildlife, that helps biodiversity. This is a picture of someone from a group called Ride for Women, which is in Bwindi, where a lot of the gorilla troops are. And there, women are being given opportunities to come in and develop skills, sewing. You know, there's different things that they already do some cultural things like basket making and other things they're making that they can sell to tourists, and they're coming in together in this place. They were working on bikes. That's why it was called Ride for Women. They were like actually renting out bikes, but now they're doing some more traditional activities, and they're becoming, you know, economically dependent. And then that's also supporting the tourism, because they're selling it to tourists who are coming to look at gorillas. I just love, every morning they start out with a song to kind of remind themselves about what they're doing there and talking about empowering themselves. And I just want to play it for you. Support their families, empowering to support their families. Pretty neat. Hey. So in conclusion, I just wanted to say that, you know, we want to help wildlife get back to the wild, whether it's for their own sake, so they can fly free, whether we do this because we feel like we have to right the wrongs, or we want to right the wrongs, or we're doing this for more biodiversity and wildlife health. I mean, there's critically endangered species, but there's animals that aren't endangered that also deserve the right to get back there and live their lives, and are important in abundance. You know, and I think we're all, you know, in the trenches, we're doing this work, and it's easy to get bogged down. But, you know, as sure as each one of these wildlife species faces problems, we're all finding solutions. So, you know, some are simple, you know, education, reaching out to local people saying, hey, don't touch the baby bird, leave it alone, you know. And some, even though they seem overwhelmingly complicated, like overpopulation, like wildlife disease, zoonotic disease transmission, like deforestation, it really helps when you work with the local community to try to develop solutions together. And Another reminder is it's wildlife rehabilitators, it's volunteers like you that are helping the individual animals, relieving their suffering, getting them back to the wild at this grassroots level. You're educating the local people. You're the sentinels for any type of wildlife disease. You're working with the communities to come up with, cooperative solutions. And that is really where we see the true innovation in wildlife rescue. And it is the most sustainable recipe we have for success. So that's what I have. So thank you for coming or for listening. And I really appreciate, again, the opportunity to talk to you all.